Hi, I'm Alex, welcome to the channel and thanks for tuning in. So recently, and I want to say yesterday, but I'm not actually sure when I will get the chance to get this video edited and uploaded by, HITID made two really significant announcements. Now both of these are related to what we have discussed in our most recent HITID video before this one, and both of these are good news. Now the first of these was the announcement that it was being listed and included within the fifth largest cannabis related ETF, THCX, or creatively named Cannabis ETF. Now the second announcement was that of a $15 million bought deal public offering, bringing more institutional capital into the investor base and done so at great terms. Now to make sure that these videos aren't just an overload, this video will only be focused on the ETF inclusion. I'll make an entirely separate video on the $15 million bought deal financing just because they're quite discrete topics and I don't want to cause any confusion. Now I will try and upload the other video as soon as possible. I am really busy in my actual job at the moment, so please bear with me, and I will do my best to have it uploaded within, say, the next 24 hours or so. As I always ask on this channel now, please can you do me the favour and please smash the like button in our ongoing quest against beating clickbaity content on YouTube. You've done an amazing job of this so far. Our last video on HITID is actually sitting at nearly 10% of the viewers liking the video, and that's absolutely insane. It's massively helping the algorithm learn that it doesn't only have to push the sensationalist content, so please keep it up. Thank you so much. If you're new to the channel, make sure you're subscribed. If you want to see more content, join the private Discord, the private video calls and other things, then check out the Patreon. And as always, I'm not a financial advisor. This video is purely for educational and entertainment purposes only, but let's get straight into it. So as we know from the announcement, HITID has been added to the Cannabis ETF, an ETF which tracks the Innovation Labs Cannabis Index, a portfolio of 33 stocks related to the cannabis, cannabinoid and hemp markets. It's the fifth largest ETF focused on cannabis, and 2.13% of the ETF is now invested into HITID. Now the ETF is actually balanced on the basis of market capitalisation weighting, which is rebalanced on a monthly basis. And this is really important, so keep this in mind and we'll come back to that shortly. So the Cannabis ETF has taken the initial stake in HITID with just over 350,000 shares. At the current market price, this is a position worth around $3 million. Now actually, this is not the only ETF which HITID is listed as part of. It's actually also on the HMUS ETF, Horizons US Marijuana Index, which is around 1/4 of the size of the Cannabis ETF. Now the investment they have in HITID is significantly smaller, with around 1.5% of their NAV invested into HITID, so that's a position of just over $500,000. Now given the recent developments at HITID, its imminent uplisting to the Nasdaq, and its status as the first cannabis retailer globally to be listed on the Nasdaq, I do expect to see many other cannabis-focused ETFs, if not all, also looking to include HITID. Now actually, the largest cannabis-focused ETF is ETFMG Alternative Harvest, which has total assets of around $1.6 billion. The second largest ETF is currently solely focused on US cannabis businesses, whereas the third, Advisor Shares Pure Cannabis, and the fourth largest, Global X Cannabis, have total assets of just over $350 million and almost $190 million respectively. Now imagine three of those four which could invest in a non-US cannabis company all did take a stake in HITID. Taking really simple, round mathematics here, assume that each of them invested just 1% of their ETF in HITID, that would still represent around $21.4 million of demand to buy HITID stock. On the basis of the stock price today, that equates to demand for, using very rough numbers here, around 2.5 million shares of HITID. Now obviously this is a best case scenario, but it clearly shows the potential which increased demand from ETFs for inclusion of HITID could have on HITID's stock price. For the ETF, this is their opening position, and personally I would not at all be surprised and almost expect to see other ETFs also start to be building a position in HITID. Now the next important dynamic here is also around the rebalancing dynamic. Now we mentioned before that Cannabis ETF reweights its portfolio on a monthly basis, and that weighting is on the basis of market capitalisation. In simpler terms here, the higher a company's market capitalisation is, the greater the weighting, and therefore greater proportion of the ETF will be invested into that stock. This also means that if a company outperforms the rest of the index and its share price grows faster than the others in a specific month, its weighting will increase and therefore the ETF's exposure to that stock will also increase, and there'll be an increased buying pressure as the ETF seeks to increase its position. Now if one does believe that HITID stock will outperform others on the ETF, on the basis of the upcoming catalyst and the other catalysts we are expecting, then it's not unreasonable to believe that this could also be a trend at play as well. Now this dynamic is not at all dissimilar from the dynamic that was actually at play with Tesla when that was first becoming part of the S&P 500. Many index funds and ETFs were forced to build a position in the company as it became part of the S&P 500, which in turn created more buying pressure, and that then in turn drove the price up even further, causing a greater requirement to buy even more shares. Now another important trend here not to overlook is that actually of increased investor interest and investor focus on the cannabis sector. Now there is a great potential here that inflow of capital into the sector increases the capital inflows into the ETFs, which are focused on investing into cannabis, and that in turn then requires them to increase their holding into the respective constituents which they're invested into. Again, this would create more buying pressure for high tide in this scenario, and again, that's good news for the stock price. Now clearly everything in this video that I have discussed is optimistic, but I do firmly believe this is definitely in the realms of realism too. Don't get me wrong, there is the real possibility that no other ETFs will lift high tide. However, as I've said before, I would be very surprised by this. I think its differentiated offering through its strong e-commerce presence, coupled with its strong Canadian retail footprint, and its status as the first Nasdaq-listed retailer of cannabis globally, makes it quite an exciting component for an ETF. Personally, I do also think there'll be a snowball effect here, where as more and more ETFs do list high tide, it will then basically become essential almost for all ETFs to be including it as part of their index as well. In a way, they won't be able to ignore high tide. There's also the possibility that high tide's stock price and valuation does not outperform the broader index. However, again, I do believe in the company's growth strategy, and clearly Raj and his team are delivering on this to date, and very successfully so, and so personally this is something I definitely expect to continue. Ultimately though, this is one where time will tell. Clearly it's a good development and there's no denying that, but as always, let's see how this develops from here. It's a long-term investment and there's a long-term investment strategy at play here. Be patient and do not expect the stock price to immediately explode and reflect the news of this and the future potential it has. Anyway, that's it for this video. Very shortly there will be another one coming which focuses entirely on the bought deal financing, also announced yesterday, and exactly what this means for us as investors, our investment thesis going forward, and why personally I'm excited by it and what I expect to see next. That's one you definitely don't want to miss out on. Make sure you're subscribed and have post notifications turned on so you don't. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please smash the like button. Check out the Patreon if you want to join the Discord, private video calls and other things. And as always, please let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. I find it so interesting to hear everyone's different opinions and perspectives, so please get involved. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.